Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reina Kaneko, and I'm the president of Japan American Society of Hawaii. And welcome to our Summer Talk Story series. Today it's with Ray Tabata, one of our volunteers. And the topic is Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, from devastation to resilience. Before we begin, I want to thank all of you for coming, for attending today, and also a shout out to my colleagues and friends from other Japan America societies across the nation for joining. Thank you very much. It's probably evening or nighttime there, so thank you very much for joining us. And then shout out to our friends from Japan who are joining us today. So, minasama ohayo gozaimasu. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to introduce now our speaker, Ray Tabata, who is a very dear friend to JASH, to me. He's been a great volunteer, spending hundreds of hours volunteering for JASH, and whether it's at education programs or some of our events. Lots of times he's taking photographs for us, and we're so appreciative. But another part of what Ray does is travel to Japan quite a few times a year. Of course, not now, but he was able to go earlier this year just before the shutdown. He's been traveling to Japan since he retired in 2011. And taking a lot of photographs. And of course, today he wants to share with us his story and pictorial story, I guess, of the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, and the people in Japan and their resilience and how they came back from that huge terrible incident and devastation, and where they're at today. Before I have Ray start, a couple of things. We welcome your questions, so please type your questions into the Q&A box. And when Ray is done with his presentation, we will have Q&A time. Okay, so I think we're ready to begin. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Ray Tabata.
Here we go. This is an experiment in Zooming because I don't do this very often. Let's see if this works. Okay. This presentation will talk about the destruction and the despair in Japan, but how people in Japan overcame great difficulties and challenges and made great progress in 9 years. So this is a 9-year chronicle from 2012, actually, when I started going to Japan, about a year after the disaster. But I'll begin with a few pictures from that first year to remind us of what happened back in 3/11 and the months following. I saw something like this on the local TV that night of March 10, and I was with some Japanese medical students at Aloha Tower Marketplace, enjoying a nice dinner. And the owner of the restaurant came by and said, "Oh, are these people from Japan?" I said, "Yes, they are." "So you better come to the TV. There's something going on in Japan." So I walked over to the TV, and cable news was showing these images from Japan. And I thought, is this a movie? What is this? Where is it? And turns out this is Miyako in the northern part of Iwate, and this black wave was washing over the seawalls. And the seawalls are not small. And the following days, we saw images from Tohoku area. Whole valleys and towns and villages were completely destroyed. And there were cars piled up everywhere. There were boats and the wreckage from the houses. There were only a few buildings left standing. Some buildings were just toppled over. And boats were washed up from the piers. Some ended up on the roofs of warehouses. kind of gives you an idea how large the wave was, as much as about 10 meters or 30 feet or more. And after the first few days, people were looking for survivors and people needed help. There was mud everywhere. And then scenes of the people, the survivors, started appearing on in the media. There were people left with almost nothing. There was a lot of despair in the first few days, first few weeks and months. Today, there are reminders of how high the wave came in different communities. So you see these types of signs all over Japan now. Of course, a lot of them are in the Tohoku area. The reminder of how high the waves came. This map shows most seriously affected parts of Tohoku. The red is mostly in Miyagi and Iwate prefectures, which are way north of Tokyo. The area between Tokyo and the tip of Honshu is about the distance from Los Angeles to San Francisco. So you can imagine this is a pretty long coastline. This diagram shows the run-up, how high the waves came up as they went up the valleys. If you look to the right, there's Miyako. The run-up height was almost 40 meters, which is like over 100 feet. That's how high the waves were as they went inland. So it gives you an idea how big the waves were. But you know, in the old days, they had these stone tablets up in the mountains. This was in, I believe, Ofunato or Otsuchi in Iwate. And these types of tablets you can find way inland, about 100, 200 feet up sometimes. And they mark how high the waves came in some other historic tsunami event. And there's a reminder in a lot of these tablets, if this is how high the wave came, you should not build below this. However, there was a lot of development in the valley floors and the areas near the shore. There are residences and warehouses and businesses of all kinds. And they were washed away basically by the tsunami, which in most places was 10 to 15 meters high, 10 to it's about 30 to 45 feet high, and it went over buildings. So this was one of the first places I visited on my own in Ishinomaki. There was a shrine here that got washed away, and there are highways and roads and bridges that were washed away. This is several years after the tsunami, and they're still working on it. This scene is of Ishinomaki. There's a famous manga museum in the middle. It's shaped like a flying saucer. It survived. But this shows what the area looked like before the tsunami, and this is after. There was not much left. And this is a more recent picture of Ishinomaki. And this is an area I hadn't even seen before until about 4 or 5 years after the tsunami, when a friend took me up to this park which oversees the port area of Ishinomaki. And they have pictures of before and after right at the lookout. This is a place called Hiyori Koen or Hiyori Park. And from here you have a great vantage point to see the area. You can see the flying saucer building back there and how it looks. This is a couple of years ago now. But much of Tohoku looked like this. Concrete foundations, that's all that's left. Just barren. There's a few taller buildings made of concrete that survived. This is Numa, I believe. And a lot of the lower areas were just devastated. There's only a few tall buildings remaining. So this is one of the first things I saw on my first trip in March of 2012. Their whole area is just completely barren. And this was taken more recently, but there's still a lot of debris that hasn't been cleaned up. Not many, but there's a few of these areas left. But urban areas, this is all that's left of in the urban areas, the concrete foundations and a few poles here and there. This is one of the early scenes from Numa, the famous freighter that got washed up. And eventually they took this away. There was some talk about making it into a museum. but local people didn't want the reminder, so they cut it up and took it away. But this is a huge ship. You can see the people down there for scale. This is also Kesennuma a few years after the tsunami. And there are glass balls from fishing boats, all spread out over here. A lot of the town was still filled with water. And here was a izakaya or something that was washed away. Rikuzen Takata, one of the largest areas that was hit by tsunami. This is a few years after the tsunami in 2013. And there was a lone pine that was remaining. Eventually it died, so they had to replace it with an artificial pine tree. But it was a symbol of hope for many years. It was the last standing tree along this coastline. Many buildings that were heavily damaged were eventually demolished. This is a building, the wave went right over the building. And you can see the seawall behind, so you can see that the seawall didn't really stop the tsunami. For a period, they were recycling the buildings, the concrete buildings. So here's a pile of rebars that they somehow extracted. It's amazing how much of the debris was removed and recycled. It's an amazing job. This was a few years after the tsunami, and the port area where I joined a group of volunteers. I was not a scuba diver because I was a little too old for that, but I was there to take pictures of what they were doing. But port areas and beaches were heavily damaged by the tsunami. There are seawalls all over Tohoku. Many are rather tall, like almost 10 meters, but the tsunami in many of these areas just went right over. The tsunami walls, the seawalls have openings like this, which allow people to go through. But even with the doors closed, the tsunami still overwhelmed the inland areas. This is the town of Taro, which is the northern part of Iwate. And these seawalls are pretty huge, but they were topped and damaged by the tsunami here. In fact, this area was one of the hardest hit because the tsunami were really high here. The epicenter was offshore from this area. So at this point, they were reconstructing the wall. This is the town of Onagawa, I believe. One of these buildings just got toppled over. The three-story building. This is the Taro Hotel in Iwate. The tsunami came through the first 2 floors and part of the 3rd floor. It's now a museum which educates the public about the tsunami in 311. There are a lot of recreational beaches like this where the wave went right through the park. You can see the force of the wave here. But a few years later, the locals are starting to come back and enjoying the place with having picnics and barbecue. The one thing about this whole disaster is how people in Japan pulled themselves up to recover. And within the first year, there were all these kinds of signs coming up. Gambaro Tohoku, Gambaro Miyagi. And the local dialect is Gambappe, but same idea. This was about a year after the tsunami. This restaurant was starting to open up again. And some of these places have pictures of like before and after, so you can see what happened and how they're doing. But this is a spirit of Japan around that time. People came together, and it was pretty amazing to see. One of the things you kept seeing all over Tohoku was the idea or concept of kizuna, which is like a bondage between people, the bonds between people. So volunteers would leave their names behind. There's volunteers from all over the world showed up in the first few years. So you see these all over Japan. But one of the things that impressed me was the attitude of the locals in these towns and villages that were basically wiped out. At the end of one of these temporary business, like a small mall, they have little buildings, like temporary shops. I saw this mosaic made of recycled wood rescued from the debris. So the townspeople made it into like an art wall. But one thing caught my attention. If you look on the top right, there's a little message somebody left. Stereba gomi dakedo. And I guess a rough translation would be, if you throw away, it's rubbish. However, and a message I took away was the people took the debris and made it into art. So they found something positive from all the destruction around them. If you read the mosaic, there's other little messages that are kind of heartwarming. But my first time in Tohoku, the lady on the right was my initial contact. And I met her through a friend of a friend of a friend, somebody I met at a local marathon event as a volunteer. So through the connections, I met up with her, and she showed me around one of the areas that was hard hit in Iwate. But I was just impressed by how positive these people were after going through everything. And this is one of the first Obasan I met in Japan. She was not in a shelter at that time, but she seemed to be in pretty good spirits after her town was basically washed away. There are many, at that time, there are many of these temporary shelters. Kasetsu jutaku is the term they use. And there's still some in Japan. There's several tens of thousands of people still living in these temporary shelters while they're waiting for permanent shelter to be built. But many people lived in these temporary shelters for years. And I met, because of my contacts and volunteer work, I was able to meet many of these people who lived in the shelters. And it was a thanks to Atsushi, who's my friend here, the one in the orange in the back. He introduced me to many of these places and people. So at these Kasensu Jutaku, there would be volunteers going in to help the residents with various activities. They have tea gatherings, or chakko, I think was the term. This guy, I think, came all the way from Kansai area as a volunteer. But this provided the residents of the residences some joy and happiness and a chance to get together with the friends. Many of them were strangers to each other. But this lady really caught my attention. And if you look behind her, there's the kanji fukizuna, the bonds between people. So I thought this is a nice image. And this one too, these women seem to be doing pretty well considering. This is the completion of a community center. The funds came from Germany to build this community center for this little village in Rikuzen Takata. And at one of the, I think it was like a final meeting before the official opening, this woman got up and sang a local folk song. It was just a very emotional moment. Now here's a guy that was in a feature-length documentary film about this guy. I think he was in Iwate. He grew sugi. That was his business, but his business was heavily damaged by the tsunami. So they had a special showing of his film, and it happened that he was a special guest. So I got to meet him in person, and he was just an amazing guy. He must be well over 80, but he's still active and seems to be doing pretty good. I think one thing you notice in Tohoku area is a lot of shops were opening up in the beginning, temporary shops all over the place. So the local businesses who were wiped out, they came back with the temporary shops, selling everything with seaweeds and dried fish and little soba shops and whatever. This one is in Kesen Numa. It's a little shopping village. And they even salon services, souvenirs. And this is a lady that was growing oysters, so she's shucking the oysters. Just amazing people. This woman I met in Miyako, way up north, she came from her home hauling that wagon. She makes these roasted potatoes, and she does this just about every day. But she has really good spirits, and it was just amazing to meet this person. She even brings her own wood for the stove. I got to meet quite a few of these shop owners who start up business all over. And I love this couple. It's a mother and daughter in a temporary, like a restaurant. You see a lot of these wagons, back then anyway. It's a ramen wagon and kamaishi. Even Matsushima, these women would be outside trying to get customers for their restaurants. Their restaurants basically survived the tsunami. They weren't run over, but they still had a hard time getting back, getting back on their feet. A lot of people who opened up shops, and uh, this guy was another amazing guy. He lost his sake brewery up in Iwate, but Japanese sake brewers from all over Japan donated equipment and supplies so this guy could get back into business. So just an amazing guy. The brewery was back up running, and we tasted some of his sake. This is one of my early visits to Matsushima. They had just begun their business again with selling Matsushima nori, which is delicacy. And this lady just started up this business, it's a pang, or like a pastry. She was so happy. This was a couple of years after the tsunami. And I met these people through Atsushi, my friend here. They have a vanilla cake. That's one of the specialty products. They also run a little minshuku for people lodging in the area. This guy I met in Matsushima, he has a sake shop that specializes in ajisake, the local sake. So we got to know him a little bit. This is in Sendai Station. This is a shoyu that was very famous in the area, and the shoyu factory was washed away, but they rescued the koji for the shoyu, and they were able to restore the shoyu business again. So she was quite happy. And they have a local sake here in this shop that they're able to start selling again. The volunteers that came from all over Japan and all over the world were critical, I think, in the recovery of Japan from 2011 all the way to fairly recently. There's still some volunteers going over, but this is the first volunteer group that I met. It's a group called Magokoro Net. Tono Magokoro Net. Tono is a town in Iwate, and that's where their headquarters was. From there, they go all over the area doing volunteer work. This is some years ago now. But this is a community center that they're working on. And this is the same group. We're at another site. I think we're preparing firewood, from what I remember. But we got to meet the locals, and this local guy came out to talk story with the volunteers. He's another, really amazing guy. He must be about my age, actually, but full of spirit. And in this project, we're clearing the hillside for a children's park. The volunteers were an amazing bunch. That's Atsushi from here in the background. But he's very active in Japan. The group is called Move for Japan. He's all over the place. We went to accompany a group of scuba divers who are going to clean a little port area, a lot of debris in the ocean. This is a Takahashi-san. He has a diving business, and he was one of the leaders of the volunteer divers. And that day, there were volunteers from other groups too, beach cleanup basically, but there was a lot of debris. There's tires washed into the ocean, and quite a bit of nets and fabric of all kinds. Some of the volunteer groups got pretty big, but meeting some of these volunteers from all over was very uplifting. Here's Atsushi with his yakisoba. Here's Atsushi. But the other volunteers, they were a lot of fun to meet. We even got to meet a former Miss Japan who came to this one little town. For some reason, she comes every year, I think, to join in the 311 memorial service. This is one of the interesting projects that I helped a little bit with in Tsunami. It's a shashin soji, or cleaning photographs. They're retrieving prints that were stuck in the mud and in the debris. So they brought them to this cleaning center so they could clean them and put them back into folders, and survivors can go look for prints that were lost in the tsunami. So if you kind of sift through some of the pictures, you can see family life in Numa, and you kind of wonder what happened, to the people. Here's some of the volunteers. But coming back to Hawaii, there was quite a bit of volunteer work going on in Hawaii. This is Hiromi, who I met. She was the one who introduced me to the Nadeshiko Club. She's also active with the Hawaii Senior Life Enrichment Association. But she was the person who introduced me to volunteer work in Hawaii. And this is some of the people that I met along the way. So really neat people. So Rainbow for Japan Kids was a project to bring kids from the Tohoku area to Hawaii, like a R&R, and it was a cultural experience, also a recreation. They had a really nice time in Hawaii, enjoying the beach. Cultural experiences, like with John Repun in Waikane area, learning how taro grows and how to harvest it. This group went to Waipio Valley. They had a good time there and learned how to make poi. We had ceremonies too, like at Waipio Valley, asking for permission before going down into the valley. And this was a volcano area, Kilauea Walk. Paying respects to Madame Pele. But in Honolulu, we visited the Japanese Cultural Center, and even Pearl Harbor. That was another good visit. The Iolani Palace. This is Kaneohe Ho'omaluhia. They were learning chants and hula. And this is at Chiemi's house in Makaha, sorry. They were learning hula to perform later, and these are some of the girls from Japan. But there's been recently a little more focus on looking to the future, rebuilding. So many towns have these kinds of planning documents and reports, like how they're going to rebuild, safety zones, roads and infrastructure, and where they're going to put the houses. So this is going on all over the Tohoku area. There's also museums and visitor centers opening up. Some of these have been around for a few years, but some of them do talk about the rebuilding plans for the future. Also, the history of the town, what was there before. This was in, let me see, where was this? This is Ishinomaki. They had opened up a visitor center, so you can see what's going on there. In Sendai, I came across this memorial community center with a little museum, and this young lady was showing people the exhibits they had put up. It's a good place to learn about the area. Finally, I want to show a little of what's been going on in terms of recovery since 2012 when I started visiting. First of all, Miyako, way up in northern Iwate, is a beautiful area, incredible scenery. This is at the Jodogahama Beach, and it's a very popular area. It's very scenic. This building was here for a long time, but it was heavily damaged by the tsunami. If you look at the corner nearest us, there's a blue mark at the top of near the roof. That's how high the tsunami was when it went through the building. But now you can enjoy a meal inside the restaurant and have a gorgeous view of the beach. Moving to Rikuzen Takata, which is more of the southern part of Iwate, there's a new bus station, and across the way is a new shopping center. This is all built on a huge plateau, artificial plateau that's way above the flood line, tsunami line. But it's a modern shopping center that they built from scratch. And this is one of the new shops, Tsurukame sushi shop. I was looking for a place to eat and I stumbled on this one. So I got to meet this guy here. He's the owner. And they rebuilt the shop. It was washed away down below. It was closer to the shore. Washed away. He rebuilt the shop and had just opened. And this is his staff enjoying lunch. Another place I visited over the years is at Onagawa. This is east of Matsushima, which is in Miyagi Prefecture. They built this a new train station, and you kind of wonder, why is this beautiful train station in the middle of nowhere? Because Onagawa is a small little town. It's like almost like the end of a line. But this place is unusual because it has their own furo, so sento, public bath. They have a gift shop with all kinds of stuff. And this is what the town looked like right after the tsunami. And today, they've rebuilt a lot of the buildings, and maybe they moved them up. I don't know what the buildings looked like before, but they built a lot of new buildings high up. The roads are rebuilt. They have a new memorial exhibit here of a police station that toppled over. So you can go through the circular route and see the history of this police station and what happened to the area. There's a new visitor center here. There's nobody here that day, so I'm not real sure what goes on here, but maybe they sell tours from here. But another special stop in Onagawa was this little shop called Megumi. And these are the 7 women, I believe, who were initially part of this little nonprofit shop. They set up the business so that they could make products to sell to support themselves. These are 7 widows. Their husbands all died in that tsunami in 2011. So this is an idea that was helped by a Christian woman who came to Onagawa, I think, to help them out. And my wife donated the Bernina in the front. She had an old sewing machine she wanted to donate. And we had an idea, we could donate it to this project because they make, oops, what happened? Yeah. So this is a shop with all kinds of things that they sew right there. Bags and clothes and scarves and whatever. Why is it stuck? Oops. Sorry, technical problem here. Not moving. Okay. Yeah, so the lady on the right is a Christian woman from a Christian church who came to help them out. And the lady in the middle there on the left, she was the one who, I think she's sort of an organizer for the group. But I visited them pretty regularly over the years. And this is the last time I was there, last year, I think it was. And there was my wife's friend at work made these little things to give to the shop. So they were quite happy to get those. And this is Matsushima, which is one of the popular visitor destinations in all of Tohoku. This one is in Miyagi, next to, not far from Sendai, the main city. It's been a popular place for many years. The Matsushima Islands are famous for the scenery. In fact, it's one of the 3 famous sceneries in Japan. This is taken pretty recently, like last year, or was it this year? But the sightseeing business seems to be back. The boat tours are running again. These boat tours are a good way to see the small islands. And the hotel in the back is my favorite hotel in Matsushima. There's oyster and nori farms all over this area, and they're back too. The tsunami washed everything away back in 2011, but they came back pretty quickly, surprisingly. The Matsushima oysters are very popular. Now, this is a family, the Yoshioka family, that I met back in 2016, I guess. Um, so over the years, I've seen them thrive at this little restaurant. This is another time I visited later with a Hawaii calendar, and their family was starting to grow. And this was taken pretty recently. Family is pretty big now. And the guy in the back on the left is, I think it was a Thai worker, but they seem to be doing very well. Ishinomaki is another city that I visited a number of times now. But now they have visitor information. The sidewalks are pretty nice. The roads are rebuilt. This building has been under construction and renovation for some time. It's a historic building. I'm not even sure how old it is. This is a sports shop that I first encountered about 2012 or 2013, not long after the tsunami. So the tsunami almost got to the ceiling. I talked to the owner, this guy here, and that's the daughter. And that was the first time I met them. And for that trip, I brought over some postcards from Hawaii, and I guess they're happy to get some souvenirs from Hawaii. But I met them not long ago. I went back to visit them, and they're still doing fine. Hasn't changed too much. And this is their new shop. So from having their store heavily damaged from the tsunami, they expanded and actually have a bigger shop now. So they're doing quite fine. There's a lot of construction going on nearby. I'm not sure exactly what this is. I think it looks like a bridge that goes over the river in front of their shop. And you can see the manga museum in the background, the round thing. So it's in the vicinity. There's a new seawall and pedestrian walkway that was not there last time I was there. It's pretty high, like 10, 15 feet at least. And here's a manga museum again. And there's a modern walkway and everything here. So there's a lot of recovery work in this area. The area near the waterfront still has a lot of vacant land. So I imagine things will be built there over the next few years. But this is a Hiori Park again, and that's a good vantage point to see the city. But this is a new building that came up. Looks like a multi-purpose building. I was trying to read the sign, but looks like an insurance company and some kind of a shop. Couldn't quite figure out who's going to move in, but it's brand new. Tourist information store shop, and there's a gift shop here that has all kinds of stuff. Great place to buy omiyage from Ishinomaki area. Now here's a guy that had a kushiyaki shop. This is a poster. He's kind of famous guy apparently, Taro. And here's his temporary shop. Oop, what happened? Oop, something missing here. Anyway, I would like to stop here and turn on. This is a memorial section for the victims of 9/11.
Thank you, Ray. I saw that portion before, but it still makes me get very teary-eyed. But I'm going to turn over now to some questions that we have from the audience for you. First of all, and this is pretty fitting, from Kiono Fujinaga. She says, "Thank you so much for reminding us about 3/11 and how local people have been since after. Today's talk was very important to me because I felt like I gradually stopped talking about 3/11. What were the particular motivating factors for planning this update talk for this moment? And what similarities do you see, if any, between issues caused by 3/11 and the issues caused by the current global pandemic?" So first of all, what was the particular motivating factor for doing this talk story today?
Thank you for the question. Actually, photography is my main hobby. But after retiring, Japan became another major hobby. And it just happened, I retired like a couple of months after the tsunami. I retired in May of 2011. So as I thought about it, thought, well, I would like to do some volunteer work in Tohoku to do what I can. But over time, I began to realize that maybe one way I can help is to document, what's going on in Tohoku. So I made it sort of like a personal mission to go and see what's happening there and to try to document how people are getting back on their feet and what volunteers are doing and how people in the community are coping. And for me, it was quite a learning experience. I remember one of the first things I realized was, oh my God, this 3/11 disaster is much, much bigger than I imagined, because it's one thing to see it on TV and in pictures, but when you see it in person, it really dawns on you that, oh my God, this is a really huge event. I mean, it's a huge area, like half of California almost. And so I think the scale of it kind of hits you. But the more I met people in the various places I visited, it was very inspiring how so many people pulled together, volunteers, the local residents, people in government and nonprofits, and it's just amazing. Um, uh, the kizuna, the feeling of kizuna, and tsunagari, which is the connection, and of course gambari. Somehow they're going to get through this. And so that was sort of my motivation to record this, so that I can share it, especially people here. We're far away from what happened. I think even in Japan, people are starting to forget because they've got so many other things to worry about, like the virus right now. Um, but I think it's good to remind ourselves that these things can happen even here. We haven't had a big tsunami like that here. The worst one we had was the Hilo one, 1946 was it? And that was really pretty tiny by comparison. And I've compared to Rikuzen Takata, like almost like the size of Honolulu, the flat area. If we had a tsunami that big here, most of Honolulu.
So really, just a little side note, I've been able to see a lot of Ray's photos from Japan, his slice of life photos, photos of people he meets, and
Hi, Ray, can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost, what do you call?
Okay, sorry about that. I think we're having some technical difficulties, so I'm going to continue with the questions.
Okay.
I guess for the same question, what were the particular motivating factors for planning this update talk for the moment? And what similarities do you see between 3/11 and what's happening now?
Okay, just to finish up the first part, I did want to document what is happening in Tohoku and to share it with people here, because we have people from Japan who live in Hawaii, but a lot of local residents here who have ties to Japan. So I thought one thing I could do was to share what I've experienced. the people, the place, what's going on, you know. So over 9 years, yeah, it's been kind of a long project in that sense. But as far as what's going on now with the pandemic, uh, I've been trying to follow the pandemic situation in Japan, mostly through NHK and Japan Times. I'm still in touch with a few people in Japan during this crisis, but mostly from NHK and Japan Times. Um, I think one thing that I believe may be happening is that Japanese in general seem to be more cooperative and concerned about the spread. So I think that's why, except maybe for Tokyo and some areas in Kansai, the rural areas in Japan seem to have a very low caseload. In Tokyo, I understand some of the spread might be caused by partying and izakaya and going to pubs and bars and places like that. So it's a crowd situation. But most of Japan, the caseload is pretty low. And I think wearing masks in Japan is kind of it's not a big thing because even way before the COVID, you see a lot of people walking around with masks on, like especially crowded places like subways and trains. So I think in Japan, the culture and the society lends itself more to cooperation and caring about other people. I mean, that's kind of a generality. Whereas in the U.S., we're seeing a lot of people just want to be, individuals, and they want to do their thing. They don't want to be bothered with masks, even with all the scientific evidence and public health officials recommending wearing masks. So it's a culturally and socially different situation, I think.
Okay, so we have a couple questions, one from Steve Sombrero and another from Toby Tamai. They're wondering what the situation in Tohoku is like today and if there's any kind of events that you know about in remembrance of this devastation.
Okay, first of all, 3/11 in Japan, every year there's national observance. I've noticed this over the last 9 years since I've been going over. They had one this past March. So it's very common in Tohoku area, almost anywhere you go, there's going to be some kind of memorial. In the past, they used to have memorial concerts too. But I'm not sure if they're having those much anymore. But I know there's ceremonies, like Onagawa, for example, that little fishing town. I've been there a couple of times now, where they have a moment of silence, the Mokuto, the 246, right? It's part of a national observance. One year I went, they actually had a national memorial with the emperor on NHK TV, broadcast all over. And they had the big meeting places, even in Onagawa, they had a big community hall. And there'd be hundreds of people gathered there and floor displays and the local officials. And it was just a big event. I'm not sure if they still have those, but I can almost assure you that 3/11, there'll be something going on in most places. Now, even in Tokyo, I suspect they have something, but I've never been in Tokyo on 3/11 because I was in Tohoku. So, but there is a national moment of silence that seems to be a practice every March 11 now. There was another question, I think, in general about what's happening in Tohoku. I would say the initial cleanup and demolition and that kind of work is well finished. I don't know how they did it so quickly. There are mountains of debris everywhere, but they was quickly removed in a year or two. A lot of it was recycled. But after that, it's been more rebuilding infrastructure like roads and seawalls and foundations for the new homes. You can see, like in Rikuzen Takata, you can see 10-meter high mounds of dirt that they're preparing for home construction later. I'm not sure if it's a good idea, but I guess the engineers must know what they're doing. But there's seawall construction also going on. I've seen that up and down the coast in Tohoku. There's even some new residential areas being built. That's been going on for some time now. But I think they're still short, way short in building permanent homes. Some people rebuilt pretty quickly. Because the first few years, I was noticing new homes coming up already up in the hills, you know. But I've heard that Kasetu Jutaku, the temporary homes, they're still operating in some areas, and I think I've seen some of them in recent trips. Shops have pretty much come back, I think. There are new shops everywhere, shopping malls. Like in Ishinomaki, I found this brand new shopping center, and it's pretty nice. And they're preparing for visitors, although right now I think tourism is completely, you know, gone. Although the Japanese government is trying to promote domestic travel now. But I understand in rural areas, they're not really keen on a lot of Tokyo people showing up in the towns right now. So the domestic tourism might be a little slow. But they're getting ready. Their visitor centers, they're trying to promote the areas a little more. They're doing a pretty good job at the visitor centers. I've seen a couple of them. They're better than the ones we have in Hawaii. Let's see. Yeah, so the other thing is Fukushima. I've been in Fukushima several times, but I haven't really gone too many places. But I did pass the Daiichi plant area. I understand people are slowly moving into the evacuation zones, but that's going very slow. There are areas that are still contaminated, and the plant has a long ways to go before they can decommission it. It's a major challenge because there's so much destruction at the plant. Just getting inside is a challenge. That's going to drag out for decades, I think. So Fukushima, the Daiichi plant area, is probably a no residential area zone right now. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, you actually answered a couple of those questions that came in. So it's we're at our 5 o'clock, a little past our 5 o'clock time. So we're going to have to close up. And you know, just one comment from Marian Moriguchi. The recovery in Fukushima Prefecture still has a long ways to go. I agree with you that the Japanese people are so resilient. It was good to see the Rainbow Project and supporters, as I'm still involved with this project. So we want to close up now and want to thank Ray for his time and putting this all together. I'm sure it brought tears to some of us. Very important to remember how resilient the devastation and how resilient everyone was back in that time. So I think we're going to end here. So thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned. Next week we have another talk story session with author Mike Malahan, who will be talking about his newly released book, and that webinar will be on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. So anyway, thank you so much again, and please take care. Stay safe.